Hi everyone. I think we can start now. All attendees are here. And welcome to our session today, What Happened in the Email Industry this year? I'm really looking forward to this session today because our speakers today are Sebastian and Alexandra. And maybe you know my name or not. My name is Maike and I'm responsible for all the marketing and event stuff at the CSA. What we do or what we have seen this year or experienced this year, all the things we'll share Alexandra and Sebastian with you later. I just want to give you a brief overview to the housekeeping rules for today. Please note that you're muted during the whole webinar. You can ask your questions at the end at the Q&A session. And today you have two options you can use to ask your questions. The first one is you can use the chat function. It might be on the right on your screen, and you can ask your questions via the chat, and we will read the questions out loud at the end. Or the second option is that you can ask your question live at the end. Of course, we would be happy if you use this function so we can share your question and answer them live, of course. And I think that's it for me now. And I would like to give the moderation rights to Alexandra, who starts the presentation. And yeah, you will hear me and see me at the end of the session again. So I think you can share now.
Looks good. Hello, everybody. Just give me a second to start my presentation, or let's better say our presentation. But before we start, welcome from my side as well. Unfortunately, it's just about a virtual meeting and not a face-to-face meeting this year, but I'm really looking forward to the session and the next meeting we have face-to-face to just share our experience and have all the real good talks we had in the past. So coming to the legal overview of this year, just give me a second. We prepared 4 topics for you today to discuss and to present you the issues we determined this year from a legal perspective, looking at the questions you raised over the year, but also looking at the issues we determined when dealing with the reports we received, unfortunately. So as you can see, it's about gambling, or at least emails promoting gambling. It's about data transfer to the US ESPs. It's about transactional emails and missing permission data. Let's start with the gambling stuff. So now it's working. Looking at the last, we can say 1.5, 2 years, advertisement for online gaming was always an issue. And a lot of companies really were waiting for the new interstate treaty on gambling in Germany because they really thought, okay, it's about a good new situation. We can have limitless gambling advertisement, and all the issues and problems we had in the past will be gone with this new interstate treaty. So let's have a look at it. The interstate treaty entered into force on July 1st this year. And the first thing I have to mention here, things changed, of course, but in regards to advertisement of gambling, it's not the big shift we had. So the first really important information is online gambling is allowed now in Germany, all over Germany, not only in a specific federal state. But the bad news for the online gambling industry and also for the advertisement of gambling is you need to have a license for online gambling. And this license is granted by a so-called joint gambling authority. And if you have this license, you're mentioned on a so-called whitelist, which can be found on a specific website at the federal state of Saxony something. Unfortunately, I have not the translation in my mind right now. You can see it on the screen. There is a link where you can find all the already licensed online gambling services. If this license is granted, you're also allowed to send emails advertising online gambling, but it's really only about this situation. And I really have to mention that looking at the discussions we had over the last month, we really expected a lot of companies just asking for this license, but it's just a few lotteries and betting services who already applied for this license and were granted with that. In regards to the pure online gambling stuff, until November 6th, there was no license granted. And another important point here is to mention that betting on lotteries, which is about, okay, who will win the next lottery, which will be the numbers who will win or something like that, is still prohibited. So no change here. And if you have customers who want to send emails in this area, I really can recommend that the customers have a good look and a good assessment whether they are just sending advertisement for a lottery or if they are betting on lotteries. And if you have customers sending online gambling advertisements, just make them aware they need the license. And if you really want to check that the license has already been granted, have a look at the web page that's mentioned on the screen. I think we can share the link afterwards too. The second important topic of this year was the data transfer to ESPs who are located in the US. The reason for that is from a European perspective, if you want to share data with companies, service providers outside the European Union, you really have to make sure that you have almost the same level of data protection in the receiving country as it is laid down in the GDPR. And the US situation was of specific relevance last year because we have a so-called Schrems II verdict of the Court of Justice. And afterwards, we had the Data Protection Authority of the Federal State of Bavaria, who just said, okay, it's not okay to just forward personal data to US-based ESPs. The reason for that is before we have the so-called Schrems II verdict, it was really fine that you transfer data to US companies based on the Privacy Shield and the old model clauses. But due to this verdict, the reason was, or the outcome was that the Privacy Shield is not sufficient and the old model clauses are not sufficient to make sure that the same data protection level is really in place. So you really needed to have weighting up the interest of the individual cases, which includes, of course, the old model clauses, but more particular requires a dedicated security measures assessment and to implement specific measures such as encryption, rules regarding data access for authorities and all that things. And this was a very complex and complicated situation. After this verdict, the Commission developed new model clauses. That's the good news here. And instead of 2 specific modules, you now have 4 modules, which means that for a much better situation, a more granular assessment, you can now choose the right framework that is applying for you. That's the good news. The more bad news is that the list of duties has been extended in this new model clauses, which on the other hand really allows now for relying on this model clauses and makes it easier for you to transfer the data to the ESPs in the US. And which is also of relevance, the duty to inform in case of any data access by authority is now already covered. So it's much easier for you to make sure that the data protection level is almost the same as it is in the European Union. Anyways, we really recommend that you still make a kind of risk assessment for 2 reasons. The first reason is only with a proper risk assessment, you can choose which model clause module is the right one for you. And we really recommend to make at least a very short documentation on this risk assessment, because if another data protection authority is thinking that something is not sufficient with these new model clauses, which entered into force in September this year, you can just make sure, okay, we already did everything we needed to do. We made the risk assessment, that's our result. Therefore, we choose this specific framework, and that's at least another layer of security for you. And what I like to recommend here too is the idea of just to think about a specific agreement on additional measures if you can agree on that. Making the technical operational manuals and security measures just as a specific part of your contract with the ESP or customer in Europe. So yeah, be safe when you are transferring data to countries which are not located within the European Union. Next topic is the issue of transactional emails and complying to legal frameworks or best practices. It's an ongoing topic this year. It's an ongoing topic in 2021. It's about queries we received to the CSA legal team. For instance, how often can I send reminders that someone is just using the double opt-in link? It's about what information needs to be in transactional emails. What about imprints? And all this stuff around here. And we thought it's really good to just have a kind of repetition why it's better not just sending them out, but to adhere to the legal requirements and to best practices that are on the market. We are thinking about double opt-in emails. We are thinking about purchase confirmations, shipping information, invoices, and something like that. And if you think about sending such emails, it's quite obvious that if you're sending such emails, you're using personal data. And as a reminder, if you're using personal data, you have to have a legal justification. Such legal justification can be, for instance, that you like to avoid the misuse of someone else's data when someone is just subscribing to a newsletter, or you want to send purchase-related communication, contract-related communication, new terms of services, something like that. As always, it's important that you have the documentation of the needed justification. So the burden of proof, unfortunately, is in any case on you if you're sending an email. So you must be able to demonstrate the legal basis for sending such transactional emails, as in other situations when you are sending advertising emails too. Otherwise, you might risk that you violate the personality rights, and that's, of course, not a good idea. Besides this, there might be some legal requirements when sending transactional emails too. Looking at the European legal framework, for instance, it's about the obligation to have an imprint in any commercial communication. So this one applies to transactional emails in any case. And another thing we want to point out here is complying to best practices might be a good idea because of the reputation. If you're not complying to specific best practices, sending out transactional emails might be perceived as spam. For instance, if it's not initiated and someone else's data has been misused and you cannot prove where the email address has been collected, it's even more perceived as spam. If you're sending double opt-in emails, for instance, twice or even more times, it's for sure perceived as spam. And if you're just make a combination of a double opt email or an invoice with additional advertising, it for sure will be perceived as spam, and that's bad for your reputation. And another thing I like to stress here is we saw in the past that invoices, emails, other communication which is contract related was sent with the sender's name, newsletter at something. So I really recommend think of the name or the email address you're using for sending such communication. Make a difference here. I think it's much better for the people who are receiving these emails, and they really can make the difference between the contractual information that need to be sent and other emails that are advertising emails. I already mentioned the burden of proof which is on the sender, and that leads me to the last point from the legal review. Unfortunately, we have again to talk about the issue of missing permission data, because we saw a lot of complaints handling procedures where in the end no information was provided to us, or missing information where in the permission data which have been sent to us. And that's on the one hand, of course, a legal issue, but also have an impact on the other hand on your reputation. So I just like to repeat here again, the legal situation first, the burden of proof, and I repeat myself, is on the sender. That's laid down, for instance, in Article 7 of the GDPR, but also in Article 13 of the Data Protection Directive for electronic communication. So it's no question here, if you're in the situation that you have to defend claims, for instance, or if someone is just saying, okay, why are you sending this? It's my data, I don't want to. The burden of proof that you are allowed to send advertising email is on you, whether you like it or not. As a consequence, if you're not able to demonstrate that you're allowed to use the personal data, fines might be imposed, and it's not about just a few euros, it's about several millions, which can be imposed on you, or 4% of your turnover, whatever counts more. So better be on the safe side. Think about the documentation, make your customers aware that documentation of the permission is really important. You really need to be able to demonstrate this kind of data. And even if someone is asking to delete personal data, just think about the situation that you might be in the situation that you have to defend a legal claim even a year after. So as long as the limitation period is running, from our perspective, it's fine to keep at least this information which you need to defend a legal claim. So that was the legal perspective. Coming to the reputational perspective, if you're not able to provide the permission data in case of any, let's call them legal claims or just normal complaints about sending an email, it's about loss of reputation. Loss of reputation from a user's perspective, because you can have a negative word of mouth. It's, as a consequence, might lead to fewer purchases, and this in the end means less turnover for you. So it's really bad. If someone is talking to the press and giving the word of mouth not only to a friend but to people from the press, it might be really negative for you from a PR perspective. And just thinking about the CSA, if you're not able to provide the permission data in case of any complaints, and it's not only once but 3, 4, 5, 6 times in a very short period of time, this might lead to some publication on our website, and in the really worst case scenario, it might lead to a temporary exclusion of participating in the CSA, and we don't want that. And it's so easy to have these documentation, so we really recommend you have an eye on this. make your customers aware. And with this, yeah, I don't know, think about it. I really like to hand over to Sebastian, who will now talk to you about the technical topics of 2021.
Zeb, I think that we can't hear you now. I'm not sure if I'm the only one, but I think the attendees can't hear you too. Alexandra, do you hear Zeb? No?
No, unfortunately not.
Okay, then. Did you switch something in the settings? No? Because before we... No, we can't hear you again. I think now, just say something.
Hello, can you hear me?
Now we can
it's
hear
working.
you. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. We can hear you. But do you hear us? I think
Obviously
so.
not. I mean, 20 minutes ago it worked.
Yeah. We tested it before and we could hear you and see you. So
Hello?
yeah.
Yes.
Now?
Yes, we can hear you, Zeb.
I'm so sorry. I
No
don't know
problem.
what happened. I think it is somehow related to my headset. What is that? That's the last webinar this year, right?
Yes.
Okay, I see.
It's already in Christmas mode.
Right. Sorry for that. Alexandra, you jumped out of the presentation mode, so I
What?
yes, I can only see PowerPoint in front of me rather than the presentation mode.
Why?
I don't know.
I didn't change anything.
Cool, thanks.
Must have
Then
been
now,
you.
now
You
we're
took over the control.
now we're back. Sorry for the interruption. Obviously, very funny to have the last webinar this year. Now it's me, and I'm happy to talk a little about the top 4 tech topics this year. So next to the legal stuff that kept us busy, we decided to pick 4 of the major topics that were discussed or that have been developed over this year. So I think the most the loudest one this year may have been the Apple MPP that was discussed in September and has a big impact on email marketing, on senders, on brands, on consultants. So let's take a little look on that. Then Google BIMI, then CSA topic certification monitor, and then a little into the best practice standards, mentioning the domain alignment or the DKIM alignment. So these are the 4 topics I thought would be best talking to you about. When we talk about Apple MPP, MPP stands for Mail Privacy Protection. Was, I think, the first move. I don't know if it's the final one or if it's the right solution for every single mailbox provider out there, but at least Apple started to do something to protect the privacy data of their users. It all started with the launch in September 2020. 2021 this year, where Apple announced that they will not allow to track the user engagement as it was in the past. The biggest impact was on tracking the open rate. So a very common technique is to track the open rates via an image pixel integrated in the email. And as this all works on loading images, Apple decided to somehow make the image service a little different, so providing a proxy image service rather than a direct download. And this makes it more or less no longer reliable to trust those open rate information. And that means many metadata based on that tracking pixel can't be used in a reliable way anymore. Open rate is the most obvious one, but as well IP or geolocation. So services that have been developed in the past for further segmentation, also demographic, to enrich the demographic segmentation, aren't that easy to use or aren't reliable anymore. And that's not only for the Apple Mail service itself, it's for every single email user that is using the native Apple Mail app and the Apple Mail services that run through the infrastructure of Apple. So if I'm using Apple Mail for my Gmail address, it has an impact on that as well. And that means that, or that was a hot discussion amongst the parties of the market, and for sure it has already a broad impact, but to be honest, we do not know how far this will go. It is just the first move, and if you ask me personally, I think Apple was the brave one to start with that initiative. And what it needs for us to understand why Apple, and I strongly believe other mailbox providers will join in the future this as well, is that Apple clearly says the user experience is our priority one. So our focus is to keep our users happy. And with all the whistleblowing, with all the data breaches, with all the data leaks that we read about or maybe were challenged in the past few years, I think Apple made a very important decision to protect their user base, because that's what users out there recognize. They do not understand the technical background of a data breach and why that happened. But what they understand is that suddenly 40 million, 50 million, 100 million data records have been published outside a database or outside a service. And that's what a common user recognizes. And when Apple, if you ask me for pure marketing, stands up and says, hey, we start to protect your privacy from now on, that's a good key and good thing to build trust in their own user group. It can be discussed on different ways, no question, but I think the biggest impact is that Apple picked up this trust level, and I think other mailbox providers will join that, and that leads us to figuring out new ways of providing engagement data. That is the more or less biggest challenge in email marketing in the upcoming years, as we will lose traction on the open rate tracking and the open rate measurement. It may impact furthermore, but the need in email marketing is still there, that the funnel of email marketing needs to be tracked. It needs to be tracked not only for the pure increase of income for a brand or from a marketing perspective, also to understand And to fulfill the expectation from the mailbox providers, please do not send any longer to unengaged customers, which is an ongoing discussion, which ends up in looking at the right data and figuring out about the right engagement for user groups. And so this requires new ways of thinking, maybe new services that we will figure out in the future. And it also requires a new way of thinking in terms of think outside the silo of email marketing and the traditional tracking methods. Maybe it's time to merge data and understand engagement, customer and user engagement in a different way, and make use of it from other channels, social media, commercial, so basket information on all this kind of stuff, and really include this and make much more use out of it than we did like we did until now. Next chart, is it working? Hopefully. Yeah. Coming to the next topic that has been discussed and was very interesting from a security standpoint and from a standards standpoint was the official announcement of Google making use of BIMI and supporting BIMI. It was launched in July 2020, where Google joined the BIMI group and officially said, okay, we will enable BIMI in our inbox. Google was the first one who really pushed on the use of verified mark certificates. So you can't make use of Google BIMI when you don't have such a certificate. And two providers joined and said, hey, yeah, we will provide that service and we will make it happen. And the motivation of Google to integrate and to support BIMI is further to push the DMARC adoption. Based on the learnings of a case study that Google and the Stanford University in the US figure out by analyzing data from, I think, April to August last year, where they figured out that phishing increased and was a kind of follow-up effect on large data breaches that happened before. So all the data that were leaked and published into the market became or were used for phishing attempts. And that's kind of motivation where Google started, okay, we need to find that, we need to fight against that, we need to protect our users. There we have it again, it's protection, it's protect the privacy of their users. Google wants to push the DMARC adoption. And the goodie and the benefit of a clear DMARC setting and DMARC adoption from a sender is to get the BIMI logo displayed in the inbox at Gmail. And I think what important information here is you will find various information on the Google support for BIMI. I think we're sending around the presentation afterwards, so it's linked here. It's a pretty good instruction and postmaster website that Google published. You can find the principles, how BIMI works and what needs to be done on the BIMI group for sure. And as I've mentioned, that the verified mark certificate are required for Google BIMI, and Trust and DigiCert are the two certification companies who work on that and will give you or are managing those certificates for the Google Beanie integration. Jumping just to the next topic, important for us in particular this year was the launch of the certification monitor in July. I don't know why I'm still in 2020, even if we're already looking forward into 2022. So we launched it this year in July 2021. And it is the monitoring tool for deliverability. The goal was to create transparency for our CSA clients. So providing feedback, data feedback from our mailbox provider partners to the ESPs related to the CSA criteria. It is basically data information based on IP or DKIM, but this enables ESPs to mitigate, to research, or to investigate deliverability issues. When I mentioned it's closely related to the CSA criteria, we're talking about spam complaint threshold in particular, which is at the level of 0.3% maximum. We require that every single email needs to be DKIM signed. So every email that creates a DKIM error while the validation happens or isn't signed at all is important to get to know. And for example, some feedback of our senders was with just knowing that there is at a specific IP or as a specific DKIM, there is an error or there are errors while sending, helped us already to figure out what's wrong, DNS setup, or at the very early start, we also figured out that Open DKIM had an implementation failure and caused some issues. So important information to know about the environment, the email environment, to make the whole traffic better. And we monitor that, and the monitoring tool enables you as an ESP to monitor the data and make use of that data. We've got several partners that work together with us to push data into our system, which is one and one, including GMX, webde-mail.com. It is Yahoo, which includes AOL as well. It is Swisscom, it is Abusix, it is Colilogs, and all those partners provide us with different data that we normalize and pull together to provide it to you as a, in a nutshell report. And these are just screenshots from the tool that you can log in web-based that gives you a brief overview about the CSA compliance status and a further drill down if you click into certain areas to monitor your spam complaint trend, your DKIM errors trend, your spam traps trend. And I recommend to every ESP to log into that tool, to make use of that tool aside to the automated Open API service that we build as well, or that we provide as well, which is the background for that tool. And last but not least, is it working? Yes. No, that's too far. Can you click? Is it working? Yes. Last but not least, I would love to talk about a little more about domain alignment, or especially DKIM alignment. Was a topic brought up earlier this year, round about April. There was at some day a hot discussion starting about alignment of certain domains in an email header. I think that was initiated by a first move of T-Online, where they said throughout the year we will start filtering based on domains, and domains that are not aligned will not make it into our system. And that initiated a hot discussion, not only amongst senders, as well amongst the mailbox providers, where they discussed what is best, how should we manage that. There were certain different opinions about how should we implement that. Is it closely related to the DMARC standard? Is it something different or whatever? Apart from this, discussion is still ongoing, and there is no final result out of it. The principal idea about that is aligning domains used in an email. As we all know, an email can include many different domains. The mail from, the header from, the DKIM domain, the link domain, the image domain, the reply use domain, the whatever domain. So we've got several different positions within an email where you can use different domains. It doesn't make sense to use that many domains. And the question for the mailbox provider is, who's owning that domain and who's responsible for the content or for the images, or who sent that email and who's the brand behind? All those questions are important to be answered for the mailbox provider. And the alignment for certain domains is discussed to create and outline different responsibilities throughout the whole sending process. An ESP is just a technical provider, so you are just providing the technical platform to enable mass email broadcasting, mass email sending. But the data quality and the email content and email strategy, that's either not 100% in your control, but it is at least not your responsibility. As Alexandra already mentioned, it is the sender's burden, but who's the sender? You can define it in different ways. The technical sender is the ESP, but not responsible for the consent, for the permission, for the content, and for the context to send an email. That's the brand. And if we look at an email header, there are different positions where the two different major parties are mentioned. It is the sender and it is the sending platform. And this needs to be addressed. And the idea is, and I try to explain it from our perspective, so from the CSA perspective, that will lead into a new criteria that we want to achieve and want to see an alignment for at least the 5322 from, which is the seen header from, and the 5321 from domain, which is the mail from. And ideally, those are signed in a relaxed way by a DKIM signature, or a strict way by a DKIM signature, which makes sure that we, on the one hand, have the ESP providing the host, the pure software for do the sending. This is the IP, this is the host. But the responsibility for the strategy, either the user feels spammed or not, is related to the brand. And that's why we are recommending this alignment, that there is no chance in the future for brands to cover themselves behind the curtain of an ESP and sending out spammy campaigns. With this obvious DKIM signature, We expect more transparency and the responsibility when it comes to high complaint rates for a certain campaign from a certain brand, that we can reach out from our side or the mailbox provider as well to both parties, to the ESP and to the brand directly, to investigate and mitigate the issue of spam complaints. And that's in a nutshell how we picked this topic up. It is an ongoing discussion, and I'm pretty sure even with that kickstart this year, initiated somehow by T-Online, we will see further progress throughout the whole next year, and it will be picked up by many mailbox providers, I'm 100% sure. And the CSA criteria is already or will already pick it up very soon to make this a progress in terms of developing standards and supporting standards for the market. That was the quick overview to the 4 tech topics that we found most important this year. And now I think we're happy for questions or comments. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, first of all. So far, we have some questions. I think I will read them out loud. And dear attendees, if you want to ask, just raise your hand and ask your question live. But the first question for Sebastian, do you know whether more ESPs will follow Apple's mail privacy protection?
Not yet. I don't know from any mailbox providers talk that they will talk directly, but it made them thinking about the user protection and tracking limitation. That's for sure. But none of them, what I heard and know so far, is really planning any similar action for now. But okay, I'm not sure if they share everything with me. They don't need to, so it could still be a secret.
The next one. What do you suggest for senders how to track engagement in the future?
That's a good question, and I think was a kind of provocation when I when I brought up the point, think about new ways. So we heard it throughout the year already in webinars from Marcel Becker from Yahoo, for example, and Marcel is a good example and Yahoo is a good example. Even though we thought that open rate tracking, or even though the open rate tracking in the common way is very natural to all email marketing providers, it doesn't 100% mirror the understanding of engagement that a mailbox provider has. So the mailbox provider thinks completely differently in terms of engagement. And I think what we already have is that, for example, Yahoo provides engagement data in a certain data feed, different types of engagement data that is already available. And I think that's something that I used to work with in the past already. And I think that will be the future as well, that this data and maybe new data standards will turn out or need to turn out where we work together. And for sure, what you still should include is the so-called web-based tracking. So rather than just having the click from the email onto the landing page, following the funnel. So incorporate that data as well. And engagement with a brand does not only mean clicking and opening. It's also if you've got a closed user area, how often do they log in? How often do they make use of it? That's also kind of engagement level that you can track and can make use of. And you can somehow transfer those insights or indications into the activity of email marketing. So when, for example, a user didn't log into your platform for 2 years and didn't buy anything the past 2 years, how likely is it that it's still a highly engaged email marketing user? So those are the indications and insights I would use personally to make use of different data types.
Okay, then a question for Alexandra. What exactly do senders need to show in order to prove an opt-in? Which information do you exactly require?
Okay, coming a little to the detailed stuff about documentation, burden of proof, and that such things. We take the easy way, opt-in meaning a consent, an active declaration that someone is really wanting to receive a newsletter or other advertising emails. It's about the declaration itself. It's about dates when the opt-in has been given, so date, time. It's about the source of the declaration, meaning is it a website where someone was just clicking, okay, I really like to subscribe to a newsletter? Was it something during other activities, even in the offline world? Someone can just make, in writing a declaration or something like that. That needs to be covered in the opt-in information, permission information. That's the relevant stuff. Of course, the email address, that's the important thing. Yeah, and the best way to do so is, of course, the double opt-in process, because if you are putting all the information onto the double opt-in email, you have a second layer of documentation here. And then you can be on a relatively secure side of things, that the person who just gave the yes, I like to, also just confirmed, okay, it's me, it's my email address, and I really like to give the declaration that's mentioned in the double opt-in email.
Okay, then we have the last question for Sebastian. Sorry. You showed 2 examples of domain alignment. Which one do you think is the more likely to become a requirement?
That's a good question. I don't know how it ends up. We will start with, can I go back? I'm not sure. With the easiest one, which is a relaxed DKIM alignment between a DKIM signature and the 5322 header from domain. So that still that already provides the transparency that there is responsibility from the sending brand to the content and to the whole email. I don't know how fast and when it will develop, but I can clearly see that we will move into the inclusion of the mail from header itself. That's why we start with the kind of first iteration of this DKIM, I call it DKIM alignment. So we want to start the consequent adoption of this alignment topic, but in the first step, we want to make it as easy as possible for the ESPs to jump in and start with. But I can see a clear acceleration of that development throughout the years, throughout the next year and 2023. I'm not sure, but the first example, the relaxed alignment, would be a good start. Because discussions with mailbox providers turned out that it's absolutely fine for them if a brand signs with their main domain on an org level, because every single subdomain underneath is automatically related to that main domain, and that's fine then. My personal opinion is a different one, but yeah. I'm more strict and more consequent on that when we start the relaxed one.
Yes, you are. But thank you, Alexandra and Sebastian, for the webinar today. Thank you, attendees, for joining us today. This was the last webinar of this year. We will start another series next year again. So yeah, thank you for joining us, and we wish you all the best for the rest of the year, of course, for next year too. stay healthy, and hopefully we can see us next year again. And yeah, thank you again, Sebastian and Alexandra, that you did the last webinar with me this year. And yeah, thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.